Jace Orin wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the diplomatic cruiser Aurora Lumen. He was a Bayrat from Series Dock 6, a quiet fixer of bent heat exchangers and temperamental warp vanes. But when the official engineering team's transport seized a manifold at Ganymede, the Union's liaison pinged every certified warp tech within 3 jumps. Jace raised his hand for hazard pay and woke up in a velvet seat across from ambassadors draped in light weave. The Aurora's corridors were cathedral tall, paneled in pearlescent alloys that shimmered when the ship flexed into microgravity. Jace kept his tools sling tight and his eyes down, boots whispering across the deck while diplomatic aides rehearsed timing and smiles. They were here to escort the Vasari Concord, fox-eared, warm-blooded, high-gravity natives, toward a mutual defense pact against the CHYR hive. Jace had read exactly one brief on the Vasari, proud, formal, hunters by tradition, and touchy about ritual. Then she stepped into the corridor. Naira Solen, first sentinel of the Vasari Guard, moved like a line drawn by a blade. She stood a head and a half taller than him, armor mapped to a lithe, powerful frame. Vulpine ears flicked from her crown of orange-tipped hair, and the same burnished hue chased down the short velvet fur along her jawline and throat. A long tail, bright rust with a white tip, balanced behind her with unconscious grace. Her eyes caught him, quicksilver irises rimmed in amber. For a heartbeat the air thinned. Jace forced himself to look away and misjudged a floor seam. His toe caught. He pinwheeled, palmed a bulkhead, and bit back a curse. The curse still came, through the ship. A pinprick flared in his jaw as his Union translator implant twitched and misfired. It scraped a thought off the top of his panic, amplified it, and broadcast it into the shared channel like a public address. She has the most incredible posture. No, everything is incredible. The corridor stilled. Vasari guards tilted their heads and the same sharp arc human diplomats froze mid-smile. Naira turned. Her tail stilled. Repeat your declaration, she said in clean trade, the consonants clipped, the vowels warm. Jace's tongue went bone dry. Translator glitch, he croaked. I respect your posture? A breathless silence followed, the kind that makes engines sound guilty for humming. Naira's mouth curved, not quite a smile. Among my people, she said, praise declared before witnesses is an oath of chase. You have set your pace beside mine, Jace Orin of the Union. He blinked. I what? You have asked to keep up, Naira said simply. Few humans do. Fewer finish. Somewhere behind him a Union attaché whispered. Oh stars! The Vasari emissary, High Regent Veshel, stepped forward, robes whispering like brush in wind. If the humans' words formed a chase oath, sentinel, they said in Vasari, translated in Jace's jaw as a cool thrumming. Then custom binds us to observe. Our alliance needs steadiness, not spectacle, hissed the human diplomat. Sentinel Solen, surely. Naira lifted one hand and the debate quieted. Her glove plates fanned with a small hydraulic sigh. Chase oaths are not spectacle, she said. They are a test of truth. A hunter who claims a running mate must run. Jace found his voice. Honored Sentinel, with respect, my translator shorted. I didn't intend to, oath. Naira studied him without blinking. Up close he saw details, faint freckling in the fur along her cheekbones, a scar at the lower lip that caught on a canine when she spoke. Intent matters. So does courage when a misstep draws eyes. Her ears angled. Do you withdraw? He looked at the rows of Vasari guards, the tapestry of human and fox-born stares. If he said yes, he'd be a footnote with a coward's stink. Say no, and he might die trying to match a high-gravity apex athlete. Jace's mouth answered before his caution could throttle it. No. Naira inclined her head once. Then by Concord right, you are named pacebond to my path for the duration of voyage and accord. She tapped a bracer. A thin silver band slid from a panel, cool as shadow. She snapped it onto Jace's wrist. It hummed, mapped his pulse, warmed. You will run when I run, learn when I teach, eat when I eat, and rest when I allow. Amazing, Jace muttered. Kidnapped by etiquette. Escorted by honor, Naira corrected, and finally, there, an actual smile. The human ambassador scrambled to convert calamity into cultural exchange. Aides spun statements. Someone shoved a stack of safety waivers at Jace, which he initialed in a fog. By the time the Aurora Lumen slipped into the blue-gold throat of subspace, Jace Oren belonged to two schedules, engineering triage under Chief Vale and Naira Solen's merciless regimen. He learned the Vasari word for water the hard way, after collapsing during sprint drills. Sarek. He learned the word for again even faster, Tula. The Vasari gym was a garden of geometry, floating rings for zero-G grapples, pressure lanes that doubled local gravity in programmable pulses, balancing spines that forced footwork and breath into the same rhythm. Naira moved through it like a story remembered by the body. Feet, she said, tapping his boots with a practice blade. Your back foot drags when you're tired. I'm always tired, Jace grimaced. Then you are always dragging. She slid to his blind side without telegraphing. Tap. Eyes. They worked in intervals, 30 seconds of focus so intense the world shrank to her voice, then a minute of trying not to vomit. Naira didn't sneer when he failed. She didn't coddle either. When he managed something close to correct, her ears lifted in a quick, bright motion that made his chest feel too large. Between drills, she taught words. The shiny wristband traced his heart rate and blood oxygen, nudging him to hydrate, to breathe into his ribs, to untie the knots from long hours bent over conduits. He showed her a trick for calming micro-vibrations in sensor housings by reseating a grounding braid with a twist of copper wire. She watched, tail ticking in curiosity. You see small truths, she said. I make machines less dramatic. Machines sing to those who listen. They sparred. Vasari blades hummed with a power curve that vibrated at the edge of his teeth. Naira switched him to a hafted training staff, then added weighted rings that slid toward whichever end he least expected. Balance is not finding stillness, she said, circling. It is learning where to put your weight while moving. Like diplomacy, he panted. And like chase oaths, she said, flowing in. The staff rattled in his hands when she parried, and he caught a glimpse of her smile in the polished floor. He tripped, caught himself, and, miracle of miracles, didn't face plant. Better, she said softly. His muscles wrote angry letters to his bones. He slept like a fallen beam and woke at alarms that pulled him back to engines. Chief Vale, a rangy belter with a vocabulary of insults for every fastener, squinted at the new band on Jace's wrist and said only, You break the pace bond, the sentinel breaks you. So don't. Jace didn't. Banquet protocol read like an engineering spec for emotions. The Aurora's hall expanded to fit Vasari aesthetics, vaulted arches, suspended lanterns of bioluminescent sea pods. Food arrived in courses that smoked or sang, textures he didn't have words for. He learned to present his hands at a slight angle so as not to show the deep callus in his palm, a Vasari sign of a life lived without play. Naira placed him at her left. The High Regent watched with alien amusement, while human ambassadors measured adjectives. Apollo Envoy tried small talk. Sentinel Solen, how do you find our ship? Broad in the hips, Naira said, which drew a scandalized cough from the Envoy and a choked laugh from Jace. Her ears twitched. I speak plain. Your hull balances well for the run it has made. Your heart beats steady but clips at the end of its stroke. A good ship, slightly anxious. That's surprisingly accurate, Jace admitted. Our warp pump overpressures at the end of each compression loop. Tiny jitter. You hear it? She asked. I feel it, he said, and only belatedly realized their voices had softened. Later, Vasari nobles quizzed him about chase oaths. Does the human regret binding himself? One asked, all gleaming teeth and jeweled earrings. Or does he enjoy the run? Jace took a breath, tasted citrus and smoke. He thought of collapsing in the gravity lane, of Naira's hand, firm, not gentle, hauling him upright while she said Tula again. He thought of a moment in the corridor when she unlatched part of her gorget and exhaled with her eyes closed, relief like a warm wave. "I'm running," he said, and didn't flinch. Naira's tail thumped once against the chair leg. "Good answer," she murmured. On the 6th day of transit, the Aurora's forward watchers pinged a density anomaly, a bloom of microscopic debris where the maps promised emptiness. Engineering crawled with bodies and harnesses as Jace rerouted sensor feeds to bypass the jittering pump. He felt the ship tense, like a breath held when a glass slips. "CHYRR sign?" Chief Fail asked. "Could be," the watch replied. "Could be Ghost Echo." Naira arrived at engineering with her guard. She stood with the scrutinizing gravity of a load-bearing pillar. Jace's wristband warmed, registering the shift in his pulse even before he did. He checked Naira's armor seals without being asked, running diagnostics by eye and ear. It felt strange and weirdly intimate to stand that close, to smell the faint metallic cinnamon of the Vasari field oil worked into her plates, to see the minute scuffs in the enamel where her blade scabbard rubbed. "Your hands are steady," she said. "Yours aren't shaking either," he said, then swallowed. "Sorry." She tilted her head. "Why sorry? Truth is a gift you keep giving." As if summoned by honesty, the bridge alarms cut loose, a keen that coiled down the spine. "Unknown swarm dropping out of fold 3 degrees starboard," the captain's voice snapped. "Shields up. Vasari honor guard to forward corridors. All non-combatants to stations secure." Jace looked at Naira. She looked back. Words weren't useful now. They ran. The forward corridor narrowed into a funnel of light and shadow. The Aurora flexed under fire. The deck rang like a struck bull. Jace's breath hitched. He grabbed a fallen guard's shock pike more for courage than competence, and forced his feet to keep pace. The CHYRR came like a nightmare sketched with too many joints, 8 limbs, translucent armor plates veined with pulsing violet, a mantled head that unfolded and clicked. Acid dripped where it touched the deck and made the metal smoke. Vasari bolts cracked and sizzled. The CHYRR absorbed, shuddered, advanced. Naira met it. Her blade hummed up through a chord that made Jace's teeth ache, a Vasari resonance meant to shatter insectal armor. She went low, feinted high, pivoted, and struck, a sequence so smooth it could have been choreography, except the blood was real. The CHYRR screamed in a key that sliced the air. Jace moved because his body refused to obey fear's command to freeze. He jammed the shock pike under a forelimb seam and pulsed. The creature spasmed, flinging ichor that hissed where it landed. Pain bit through his forearm as a claw raked him. He dropped, rolled, came up swearing. "Left!" Naira barked. He shifted without thinking. Her blade kissed the space where his head had been and took the CHYRR's reaching limb at the joint. It reeled. She stepped into it once, twice, drives like the punctuation of an old poem, and buried her blade through the hinge of its throat. It fell, convulsing. Acid chewed the deck into smoking scallops. Jace tasted copper. The shock pike clanged from his fingers. "Jace," Naira said, voice lower than he'd yet heard it. "Eyes on me." He dragged them up. She pressed her palm to his blood-slick forearm. The glove plates split to reveal warm fur and the bare skin of her hand. "Hold here." She put his other palm against her waist, just above a plate scored by claws. "And here." "You're..." He swallowed. "You're hurt." "We both are," she said. "We are also alive." "Breathe." He did. For 3 breaths the world was her eyes and the throb under his fingers and the steam of cooling acid. Then the ship lurched again. The moment shattered. "Move," she said, and her ears flattened as more shadows skittered on the walls. By the time the immediate onslaught ended, the aurora lumen bled light. Sections flickered. A hull fracture webbed along deck 7. The warp pump, already jittering, kicked, choked, and died into a sullen hum. Chaos organizes itself around people who do not panic. Jace discovered, to his own surprise, that he had become one of those people. He strapped on a harness, anchored his boots, and crawled into the warm throat of the pump. Chief Vale cursed at the broken symmetry of a compressor vane. Jace listened, fingers on the housing, and felt where the vibration wanted to go. "Lose the second stage damper," he said. "It's echoing the frequency from the CHYR impact. We need a crude path, not a pretty one." "That's a caveman bypass," Vale growled. "It's our caveman bypass," Jace said, and wedged a flex hose into a gap no manual would authorize. The pump cleared its throat, huffed, and rolled over into a coarse, dependable pulse. Not elegant, but alive. In the hours that followed, Naira came and went like a moving boundary. She hauled debris with a gentleness that didn't match her armor. She guided panicked aides into alcoves and pressed foreheads, Vasari comfort, to their brow bones until their breaths matched hers. Once she stood in a doorway and simply watched Jace fix a severed bus with a handful of splices and a prayer to conductivity. He felt her gaze like warmth down his back, concentrated, assessing, approving. At some point, time had been hammered flat. She slid down the wall opposite him and unlatched her gorget. "Sit," she told him. He sat. They ate standing rations, Vasari protein bricks that tasted better than they looked, human glucose gel that tasted worse than it looked. Jace fumbled his Vasari. "Sarek," he offered, passing water. "Sarek," she echoed, amused. "Your accent is appalling." "Teach me," he said, surprising himself. Her ears tipped forward. "Gladly." Under emergency lighting, language became a third person in the room. Naira taught him. "Athri, hold fast, and Sola, not alone." Jace taught her the engineering slang for the moment a machine pretends to die to make you show it love. She laughed, a sound like textured silk. "Vasari have a word," she said, eyes half-lidded. "For the breathe before the leap, when you decide to trust the ground you cannot yet feel." "Veth." "Veth," he said, and the word caught on the sore parts of his throat. He looked at her, at the orange fur rimming her ears, at the small nick in one where something once grazed. "When I said what I didn't mean to say," he murmured, "it wasn't a lie." Her tale stilled. "I know," she said. Jace could have filled the air with apologies. Instead, he held quiet and let the ship's low thrum take some of the meaning. When he finally stood to go pry open a stubborn access panel, she caught his wrist. Not the banded one, the other, and turned his hand over. "This scar," she said, tracing a pale line that ran from thumb into palm. "Fan blade," he said. "I forgot to disengage. Idiot tax." "You bled and learned," she said. "Athri. Hold fast." She squeezed once and let go. It felt like a vow from the other side. The Union frigates Kestrel and Verity burned into real space 2 days later, chasing the CHYR away with hard light and louder promises. The Aurora Lumen's crew cheered not because the cavalry looked impressive but because it meant sleep could have edges again. Medical insisted on stitching Jace's forearm properly. Vasari medic sealed Naira's gouges with a salve that smelled like green pepper and sea. The human and Vasari delegations reconvened in a smaller hall because the main one now had a hole you could see stars through. The treaty signing should have been pageantry. Instead, it felt like survivors in good clothes agreeing not to die together. Naira stood in her formal armor, polished until it held the room in miniature. The High Regent raised their hands. The Union ambassador did the same. Words were spoken. Seals pressed. Translators hummed. Then Naira stepped forward out of her script. "Before witnesses of concord and union," she said, voice carrying without amplification, "I name Jace Orin of the Union as ward runner to the first Sentinel's path." Her ears were high, her tail lifted in a banner curve. "He kept pace when blood-tested vows. He speaks with unshaded mouth and works with unshaking hands. Among the Vasari, such truth and courage are bond." A gasp rolled through the room like weather. The title hung there, heavy and bright. Jace felt eyes like stars on his back. The Union ambassador blinked, rearranged their face into something like delight, and said, "What an honor!" Naira looked at Jace. Not a command. A question. He remembered room corners where panic curled, and her palm on his pulse, and the way her voice put stones under his feet when the floor tried to tilt. He was a mechanic with a taste for quiet and the shipyard's oil-salt air. He also was a man whose life had been a sequence of safe choices until one translator hiccup shoved him into a corridor where monsters shrieked, and he didn't run. He stepped forward. "I accept," he said, and felt his mouth shape the Vasari properly for the first time. "Veth." Her eyes softened in a way he'd only glimpsed once, bleeding light through armor. She leaned in, pressed her forehead to his, fur brushing his skin, warm and precise, and breathed. "Sola." Not alone. The weeks that followed braided their paths tighter. Jace split his hours between engines and the Vasari deck. He built a real fix for the pump, not the caveman bypass, and taught Vasari techs how to tune union converters by listening for a ghostly whistle that meant a gasket wanted love. In return, Naira taught him the Vasari bow that wasn't submission but shared weight, the way to plant a staff so the floor became an ally, and the breath that meant, "I hear you," even when words failed. They took on mock hunts in the Aurora's Arboretum, opponents wearing flickering hollow masks that mimicked CHY or motion. Jace learned to anticipate without panicking, to angle his body so Naira could find the space she liked best to strike from. She learned the rhythm of his fixes, the way he needed a minute to stare at a problem before his hands moved, the mutters that meant he was assembling a map in his head. At night, when schedules blessed them with simultaneous quiet, they traded stories. He told her about Series Doc 6, the way the sun came thin and long through the girders, how his mother measured time in tea kettles and ship departures. She told him about Vasari plains at dawn, the world held in pearl light, and the old women who taught cubs how to listen to wind as if it were gossip from the earth. He asked if Vasari marriage was like human. She laughed until her eyes watered. "We use many words so we do not step on the wrong tail. But yes, it is a promise to run together when running is hard." "And when running is easy?" he asked. "Then you remember the hard," she said simply. "And do not grow careless." I'll run past the red dwarf Varka. A CHYR splinter pack cut across their wake, spitting needles. The Aurora's port shields took a bite they shouldn't have. Alarm staggered. This time, the fight didn't crash into a single corridor. It spread like mold through the ship. Jace and Naira moved like a pair who had learned each other's next move. In a service spine washed in red light, he kneeled over a fried junction while she covered the open end. A CHYR scout skittered on the ceiling. She snapped her blade up and pinned it like an ugly moth. Acid spit sizzled on the metal above his head. He didn't flinch. He crimped the line and slammed a breaker home. Light surged. "Athri," she breathed. "Tula," he answered again. Later, in the med bay, he sat on the edge of a bed while a nurse wrapped his ribs. Naira stood with her arms crossed, tail lashing slow. "You did not tell me you were hit," she said. "I was busy not letting the ship die," he said. "Also, I didn't want you to look at me with that look." "What look?" "The one you're using now." Her ears flattened, then lifted, contrite and amused. "I am learning how to carry care without making it a weight," she confessed. "We can carry it together," he said. Her smile started at the eyes. "Sola." They found an unused observatory on Deck 10, one of those pretty luxuries budgeted by people who had never worked a ship through a storm. The glass had survived the last fight. Stars poured in like cold wine. They sat within reach, not quite touching, a comfortable static between them. "Ward runner is an old word," Naira said, chin on her clasped hands. "In the first hunts, a sentinel claimed a runner to test pace over plains long enough to forget pride and remember lungs. It was a training, yes, but also a choosing." He watched her profile, the way the fur along her cheek caught starlight. "Choosing what? Who did not make you smaller to make themselves larger?" He looked at his hands, new scars bright along old ones. "I've been small in rooms," he admitted. "I didn't mind. Smaller got me ignored. Ignored got me left alone to fix what mattered. And now?" He blew out a breath that fogged the glass. Now I want to be seen by exactly one person, and I'm terrified I'm not brave enough to stand in that light. She considered him, head tilted. Jace Oren, she said finally, voice so soft he felt it on his skin. The first thing you did when CHYRR screamed was move toward the scream. Your fear has a noble hobby of lying to you. He laughed, helpless. I like your people's compliments. We do not smear them with butter, she said gravely. We serve them raw. He turned, leaned his forehead to hers in the Vasari way. It had become easy, this gesture. It still shook him. Veth, he whispered. Sola, she replied. The next conclave, larger and louder, met under a banner that showed the Union Star and Vasari moon braided. Jace stood not at the back with text but at Naira's side with a narrow band of silver at his wrist and a new badge on his chest that said runner in both alphabets. Humans asked questions about Vasari rites in voices that tried not to be curious and failed. Vasari asked Jace to explain why humans name machines as if they were children. He told the story about the first hug he worked, Poppy, and 3 Vasari laughed until one had to lean against a wall. At a lull, a CHYRR envoy arrived in a shivering column of shielded glass, their translator scrawling meaning in careful, unpleasant lines. The room tensed like a muscle. Naira's hand found Jace's wrist and squeezed once, not possession but agreement. He remembered a line from a manual, when currents oppose, anchor points matter. He braced, not against fear but for her. The talks turned ugly, then brittle, then practical. Concessions like puzzle pieces traded places until something like a picture formed. It would never be pretty. It would be sturdy enough to walk on. When signatures dried, Naira didn't step forward to claim him. She didn't need to. That had been done when both of them were bleeding and laughing on a floor full of acid scars. What she did was turn to him in the murmur and say simply, "Run?" He grinned. "Run." They left the hall and sprinted the ship's long spine end to end until their lungs burned. People got out of their way. Doors opened. The Aurora Lumen hummed like a living thing applauding. At the far end, bent double and laughing, Jace looked up at her and said, "You know, Sentinel, your posture is still incredible." Her ears angled forward. "You speak this truth deliberately now," she said. "Deliberate truths are my specialty," he said. "So are accidental ones," she said, and caught his hand with careful claws. They would return to Ceres and to Vasari planes. They would write new manuals for engines and for running beside another person. They would fight again, and they would rest, and they would learn how to navigate rooms built by people who feared simple words. On a quiet watch, while the Aurora coasted between obligations, Jace lay in an access crawl and listened to the pump he'd coaxed into steadiness. He had learned to hear the ship as breathing, not pulse, long in, longer out, a patient animal. He closed his eyes and counted. Below him, blurred by hull and distance, Naira ran the perimeter with the grace he could now predict in his bones. He knew where the set of her foot would change for a turn, where her tail would flick when a line of thought snagged, where her breath would catch when she let herself remember a field at dawn. He tapped his wristband twice. It warmed. Somewhere, she tapped back. When he crawled out, later, she was waiting. She didn't say, "Did you fix it?" She said, "Did it tell you what it needed?" "Yeah," he said, and reached for her hand. "And so did you." They stood together with the stars again, not making vows because vows had snuck in during work and water and small words said right. Jace breathed, and in the space between breaths a truth landed so lightly it didn't even rattle his bones. He had kept up. And he would keep keeping up, because running was no longer something he did to get away from a thing. It was the way he moved toward the life he had chosen, with the tall Vulpine sentinel whose laughter felt like a map through night, whose honesty made language easy, whose pace had become his own. Veth. Leap. Sola. Not alone. Athri. Hold fast. And when the translator in his jaw flickered, as if preparing to betray him again, he smiled into the dark and thought clearly on purpose. She is extraordinary. This time, The only one who heard it was the one who needed to. The Aurora Lumen's escort peeled away above Vasari Prime, leaving the cruiser to sink toward a planet that looked like a living ember. Seas of slate blue, continents the color of burned honey, vast grasslands shimmering gold in the wind. The docking spire rose from a city shaped like a ring of standing stones joined by halls, ancient geometry modernized and alive. Jace stood at a viewport, trying not to look like a tourist and failing. "Your planes go on forever," he said. "Forever is a human's exaggeration," Naira replied, ears tilting with humor. "But they go on long enough to change your stride." Vasari reception moved like a hunt, purposeful, coordinated, all eyes aware. Aromas of spicy resin and sun-warmed cloths spilled through the hall. Jace caught glances, curious, measuring, not hostile. Children with bright tails peered from behind elders' legs. One cub waved. Jace waved back. The cub's tail shot straight up with delight. Naira led him not to a throne room but to a windhouse, a long hall open to the plains, its roof ribbed like a ship's keel. "Sentinels present their pace bonds here," she said. "The wind listens. Elders listen harder." Elder Keeper Thalen approached, gray fur tufting at brows and chin, staff bound with copper bells. "First Sentinel," they rasped warmly. "You return with a new rhythm." Naira bowed. "Elder Keeper, this is Jace Orin. He runs beside me." Thalen's eyes crinkled as they took in the human stance, the scars on his hands, the way he did not shuffle or puff himself larger. "Welcome to ground that does not pity soft feet," they said to Jace. "May it bruise you into balance." "Looking forward to it," Jace said, and meant it. That night, the windhouse filled with voices. Vulpine singers wove harmonies like braided leather. Naira served Jace a bowl of Farron stew, gamey, pepper-hot, soothed by a dollop of cool herb cream. He burned his mouth and pretended he didn't. She pretended not to notice. Later, they stood at the threshold while the dark rolled in, smelling of crushed grass and distant rain. "This is where I learned to leap without proof," Naira said softly. "And to land without apology." Jace leaned his shoulder to hers. "Teach me both." Training on Vasari began where pride wears blisters. Naira woke Jace before dawn to run the spine, a narrow ridge above the plain lined with cairns. Each cairn marked a story. A hunt survived, a hunt failed, a hunt forgiven. "Read the ground," Naira said. "It says more than the sky." He learned that Vasari pace was not uniform. It breathed with terrain, shortening on scree, lengthening where soil packed hard, softening when the wind turned treacherous. She tied small bells to his ankles, not as punishment but as teacher, every clink a note on where his weight betrayed him. "Listen," she said, jogging backward to watch his form. "The bells tell on you. They're snitches," he puffed. "Very helpful snitches." They practiced staff and blade in a circle of stone. The staff Naira chose was Vasari grown, lighter than his shipboard composite, alive with faint sap smell. She showed him the 3 bridges: low sweep, high guard, center line, again, and again, and again, until his hands began to position themselves before his head found the thought. Between drills, elders drifted by to drop truths like seeds. "Take the longer path if the shorter one steals your lungs. Drink before you thirst, leave before you're begged. You are not prey unless you choose to run like prey." Jace fixed the windhouse hinge when its song went from pleasant to peevish. A cluster of youngsters watched, then presented him a fist-sized whirlstone polished by paws over generations. "For balance," said the boldest cub, tail scribbling joy. He carried the stone in his pocket whether he needed balance or not. At night, sore and content, he lay on a woven mat in Naira's family lodge, listening to the quiet bustle of domestic peace. Water poured, laughter damped, a grandmother's soft scold. He realized the sound nodded something inside him he hadn't known was loose. "You look like a man who has seen a map of a place he thought imaginary," Naira murmured from her pallet. "Yeah," he said into the dusk. "It has a kitchen." Her ears flicked. "All the best maps do." Word came from the western flats. a pale herd moving wrong. Vasari herds of swift ungulates, cream coats, black horns, migrated with the seasons, predictable as moons. When a herd moved wrong, predators learned new paths. Hunters paid attention. Naira strapped on light field armor. We will scout. You will not fight unless I say. Copy, Jace said, reflexive shipboard slang making Thalen chuckle. I am learning your words. You suffer mine. They have good bones, Naira said. They ran out with 2 additional sentinels, Carrick and Vaila, long-legged and spare. Jace kept the bells off his ankles today. Respect for quiet trumped teaching. The plains smelled like sun and sweet iron. The horizon did that Vasari trick where distance was a verb. They found the herd by the shimmer of heat over backs. The animals hunched, crowded, turned as if trying to fold into themselves. Jace felt the wrongness in his own body, a pressure behind the eyes, a taste like old batteries. Signal wash, he whispered. Someone is painting the area with a field, low amplitude, wide band. CHYRR? Carrick's fur lifted along his spine. Or a pirate trying a new toy, Vaila said. Naira tapped her bracer, a lattice deployed, bending light. They slid closer. At the herd's edge, a small metal obelisk thrust from the ground, soundless, wrong as a lie in a lullaby. Device anchors a pressure wave, Jace said, hands already reaching for tools. Confuses the herd, corrals them. Then take its teeth, Naira said. He knelt, felt for the field's phase with the tongue pressed to a molar sensor. Old series trick. The wave came on a slow pulse. Lazy until it wasn't. He snaked a grounding braid under the casing, clipped a bite lead, and smiled when the obelisk purred like a cat about to nap. No, he said. Naira drove her blade tip between plates and twisted. The obelisk sighed into silence. The wrongness peeled off Jace's skin like humidity after a storm rolls past. The herd lifted heads, stepped, remembered how to be animals. Carrick found tracks, 4-toed boots, light-hearted but not Vasari. Poachers, he spat. Or CHYRR in clever shoes, Vaila muttered. Naira looked at Jace. Run the edge with me. They followed the tracks to a fold in the land where grass parted around a temporary blind. Inside, rations, a vibro saw, a beacon set to whisper coordinates. Not CHYRR, pirates then, opportunists testing tech on Vasari soil. Naira's ears flattened. They think we are too polite to bite. Let's disabuse them, Jace said mildly, and tripped the beacon into screaming a distress call to a frequency only pirates used. When the raiders returned at dusk to collect their harvest, 3 sentinels and 1 human greeted them with impolite efficiency. No one died because Naira didn't allow it. Everyone limped because Naira did. Diplomacy, she said afterward, cleaning a cut, is agreeing on the size of the bite. News of the thwarted raid traveled faster than sound in a small world. The Concord lit city bells, striped bronze throats hanging from high beams, that rolled a deep chord across neighborhoods. Bells for vigilance, Thalen said. Also for pride, we have not forgotten how to teach thieves manners. The bells brought humans too, union agronomists, security consultants, and 1 nervous cultural envoy who practiced pronouncing Sarek until a cub gave him a sticker for effort. Jace found himself a translator between grinders and growlers, showing Vasari builders how to use a Union field leveler while explaining to human engineers that a Vasari spine brace wasn't primitive, it was elegant. He rebuilt the windhouse hinge properly, adding a hidden counterweight that made it sing in a lower, happier key. Elders pretended not to be impressed and bribed him with honey cakes. Later that night, he and Naira ate them on the roof and let sugar make their tongues careless. You made the hinge sound like the cast of my grandmother's kettle, Naira said. I tuned it to your favorite note, he said, then went still at his own boldness. She didn't. She leaned in, brushed her nose along his temple, Vasari affection, old as dawn. The note is home, she said. Below them, bells answered one another like old friends either side of a wide street. Jace thought about the voice of ships, the breath of engines, the hush of corridors after a shift. He made a small sound that wasn't quite language. Your eyes do that water thing, Naira observed, fond and unsurprised. Yeah, he said, and laughed at himself. Keep doing normal things like that and I'm going to get unbearably sentimental. I will regulate the dosage, she promised gravely, tail curling around his ankle. CHYRR are bad students at compassion and excellent students at pattern. After the treaty, they tested every seam. A convoy on the Callan Arc vanished into static. A Vasari trading post received a parcel that unfolded into knives. A Union outstation reported hearing singing in the ducts, and then nothing at all. The call reached Vasari Prime as dawn washed the plains. The outstation herald spoke. A lonely wheel on a lonely orbit had gone silent. Union wanted a show of joint resolve. Vasari wanted their people back. Naira kissed her grandmother's brow, pressed her forehead to Thalen's, and turned to Jace. We run again, she said. Wouldn't miss it, he said. The Aurora Lumen met them at high anchor with a new skin of armor, and a crew whose laughter had an edge to it. Chief Vale punched Jace in the shoulder. You leave me with the polite ones and run off with the wolves? Hybrid schedule. Jace grinned. Good. The pump missed your hands. Harrow's spoke rolled in black, docking lamps dead. The Aurora's shuttles slid like cautious thoughts to kiss the locks. Atmospheres equalized. Doors sighed. The boarding parties met no resistance, which is its own kind of threat. Naira's guard advanced in a low, layered wedge. No heroics, just hungry competence. Jace kept to her shadow, shockpipe clipped to his sling, tools laid out where his hands could find them by feel. They reached the central spindle. The lights stuttered on and off, wrong rhythm. Breathing wrong too, systems panting. They found the first bodies under a spill of emergency foam. No acid. No CHYRR. Just people with eyes open to things no one could see. Sound? Jace whispered. He could feel it in his teeth. A harmonic, a standing wave in the structure. It's been singing them apart. Kill the song, Naira said. He ran for the central mass damper, the ship's ear. CHYRR had seeded the spoke with whisper nodes. Discs the size of coins, at resonance points, their collective murmur built to a frequency that turned human equilibrium into soup. Jace plucked 3 from a bracket, 4 from a seam, found one with his tongue's pressure sensor, and laughed despite everything because Ceres had taught him how to find lies in walls. Naira and the guard held a perimeter against nothing you could stab. That didn't make it easier. Her ears pinned. Her tail fought for stillness. The quiet is loud, she said through clenched teeth. Almost, Jace said, unbolting the cover to the damper. His hands moved without argument from his brain. He detuned the counterweight, changed the ship's hum, and the spoke exhaled, one great whole-body shudder. Silence fell. Real silence, the kind that makes your bones aware of themselves. Song's off, he panted. Then we are on, Naira replied, and they moved through the spoke, waking the sleepers who could be woken, wrapping those who could not in sheets and names. They found a CHYRR scribe, a small, brittle thing, curled inside an access crawl, carapace chalky from the wrong environment, clutching a deck of thin plates etched with waveforms. It didn't fight when Naira gently lifted it out. It only clicked a soft regret and touched the plates as if to say, "This is my confession." Jace took the plates. "We'll learn your song," he told it, not unkind. "And teach it a better ending." In the aftermath, Union and Vasari convened a resonance accord, new standards for structural tones, damper geometry, and alarm signatures that caught whisper nodes before their choir found a voice. Jace and Naira became a strange sort of pair on the circuit. She handled rooms with teeth, he handled rooms that sang. Together, they made sure the next Harrow's spoke would stay a place where coffee could smell like mornings instead of like last times. They fought CHYRR more than once, of course. Sometimes swords and acid, sometimes chalkboards and chalk dust, sometimes meetings that lasted too long and saved more lives than fights ever. Real days. On Vasari, that meant running the rain steps, granite stairs cut into a cliff where water fabricates courage by repetition. On Ceres, it meant teaching Naira to skate the maintenance ring with a push sled while Tex cheered and placed illegal bets. One evening in a hotel with windows that forgot to tint against sunset, they put 2 cups of tea on a sill and talked about a thing they hadn't named because the naming made worlds move. Ward Runner is a promise to the path, Naira said. Not always to the person. I know, Jace said, cup warming his palm. What do you want your promise to be? She asked the sky, which had less capacity for panic than he did. He thought about how he'd chosen safe rooms for so long his life had the shape of caution. He thought about the hinge he'd tuned to the note of home. He thought about Veth, the breathe before the leap. You, he said. If you'll have me. He swallowed. Not just the running. The stopping. The cleaning the kitchen. The very unglamorous inventorying of socks. The parts no one writes ballads about. Naira turned slow as a sunrise. Jace Oren, she said, ears easing, tail unfurling. That is how Vasari propose. Oh, he said faintly. Then good. Very good. She murmured, and set her cup aside to press her forehead to his, a new vow braided through old ones, no witnesses but 2 cups of tea and a window that watched kindly. Tradition demanded a test. Not trial by blood, by breadth. Elder Keeper Thalen, who had a talent for setting tasks that exposed character without breaking bone, designed a hunt that was not a hunt. You will carry shelter from the plain's edge to the windhouse, they said. That is all. Jace eyed the object, a windsail folded tight, longer than he was tall, ribbed with spring steel, heavier than it looked. How far? He asked. Far enough, Thalen said, twinkling. They set out at dawn. The sail wanted to catch every stray breeze and become a lover of chaos. Naira refused to take the weight. This is your carry, she said. I carry the road. She read the ground in a way that made his job possible, choosing the shoulder of the ridge where wind sheared clean, timing steps so gusts hissed past rather than grabbed. When the path narrowed, she moved behind him, her body a windbreak, tail fanned. When his arms shook, she said only, breathe down to your feet. And he did. At noon, they took shade in the lee of a rock fong. Naira handed him water, watched him drink, stole the bottle for a tiny sip, then handed it back. Your face is very honest about your opinions, she said, amused. It's thinking about mutiny, he admitted. Tell it we finish what we begin. They did. When the windhouse came into view, bells moving lazily in the heat, Jace felt something like grief that it was almost over. He set the sail in its cradle. Thalen touched the frame, then his cheek. You brought shelter to shelter, they said. Some hunts end by making a place for breath. Naira's smile was small and full. He makes many places for breath, she said. Thalen snorted. Then he will do, and wandered off humming. Not all dangers wear banners. A season later, in a corridor on a station that sold spices and secrets, someone tried to separate Jace from his shadow. The tactic was simple, a child crying for a lost parent, a voice pitched to pluck at human wiring. He stepped toward the sound and saw the glint, not in the child's eye, in the mirrored panel where a second figure coiled, knife low. He didn't shout. He stepped back into Naira's space instead, so her body had the right angle. She pivoted sideways, caught the knife wrist, and folded the attacker into the floor with a motion that seemed to pass through 7 dimensions. The child blinked and bolted, more alarmed by a failed script than by violence. HFY our proxy, Naira said, nose wrinkling. Smell of their resin on the handle. Jace let his heartbeat slow. They're learning ours. We're learning theirs. That is the annoying thing about wars you mean to win by living, she said. You must keep living. They bought the child a hot roll from a vendor and handed it without lecture. You starved because someone taught you to. Let us teach you different. Later, in their room, Naira pressed her forehead to Jace's shoulder and exhaled long. I do not like knives near your ribs, she muttered into his shirt. Me neither, he said. I happen to be very attached to these ribs. Good, she grumbled, and bit him very gently through the fabric, which counted as Vasari comedy. They built a small house on Vasari, not because they needed it, the wind house would always open for them, but because choosing a roof is a ceremony with gravity. The house looked like part ship, part lodge, curved beams, a window that watched the plains, a workshop where metal and wood could argue politely. What do we call it? Jace asked, setting a kettle on a stove that had opinions about heat even on good days. Keth Sola, Naira said. House of Not Alone. He grinned. Perfect. They filled it slowly, a staff rack Naira carved from stormfall wood, a drawer of gaskets Jace swore would be useful one day, 3 cups that didn't match but felt right in the hand, a basket where a visiting cub inevitably napped and drooled. They hung the whirlstone by the door so it clicked gently in drafts, a stone bell. On the sill, 2 small tokens, a bolt from the Aurora's old jittering pump, polished bright, and a braiding bead from Naira's first training band. Old promises recast as decoration. Elders came by with practical gifts, a knife that stayed sharp, a pot that forgave burns, and impractical ones, a poem written in knotwork, a wind chime that sounded like laughter. Chief Vale mailed a wrench with a ribbon on it and a note, for when your domestic pump develops a sudden personality. It did often. Jace adored it. Naira tolerated it because Jace adored it. At night, they watched storms cross the plains like ships. We made this, Jace would say, meaning the roof, meaning the us. Naira would nuzzle the line of his jaw and answer. We keep making it. Treaties settled into habit. Patrols learned new routes. Children born to the Accord grew up with both alphabets braided into their names. The CHYRR didn't stop, they adjusted. So did everyone else. One morning, bells rolled from the city, 3 long, 1 short, the code for return joyful. The Aurora Lumen slid down from a sky the color of old copper. She had new scars and new jokes. Chief Vale's hair had gone a little whiter, his grin hadn't. Pump's jealous, he told Jace. It hears you built a domestic version. Comes home to me sulking. I'll pet it, Jace promised gravely. Naira walked the gangway with Jace at her side, tails of both banners, Union and Vasari, riffled by the same wind. The crew lined the rail. Civilians crowded the plaza. Thalen stood at the front with a staff ringed in fresh copper. The elder lifted the staff and spoke, voice as big as bells. Once, we hunted alone and called it strength. Then we hunted together and called it chance. Now we hunt together and call it sense. Laughter and applause braided. Naira squeezed Jace's fingers once. Anchor, signal, promise. All the things hands can say when mouths are busy being proud. He looked at her, at the beautiful humanoid Vulpine woman with orange fur and ears that told the weather, at the warrior who tuned her stride to his breath without losing a step, and felt that light landing again. He had kept up. He would keep up. Slowly, safely, stubbornly, joyfully, whatever the terrain demanded, whatever the wind whispered, whatever the ship or the house or the world asked them to carry. Run? She asked, out of habit, out of love. He smiled. Always. They did. Down the long spine of the day, bells keeping time, engines humming a second heartbeat, the planes writing old stories and new accents under their feet. Veth. Leap. Sola. Not alone. Athri. Hold fast. And somewhere very far off, a CHYRR scribe inscribed a new character next to humanity's name, annoying, resilient, immoderately affectionate toward engines, and revised their song to account for a truth that refused to detain. Some bonds, once forged, become infrastructure. Rumors don't travel, they breed. The first clutch hatched on miners' calms along the Hadean Reach, where prospectors swore they'd heard a CHYRR voice speaking in human cadence. By the 3rd retelling it was a queen who'd learned trade, by the 10th it was a queen who laughed. On Vasari Prime, Thalen sealed a letter in wax and wind dust and handed it to Naira. The Reach is too far to wait for certainty, the elder said. Run your certainty there. The Aurora Lumen took them out on a long, spare arc space thinned. Stars crowded in. Jace tuned the pump to a lower, steadier breath for long haul. Old freighter tricks dressed in Sunday clothes. Naira's guard drilled close quarters and narrow maintenance spines until their footfalls made one sound. They reached Lysander Gate, last way station before the reach, a wheel of shops, sleeping pods, rumor bars, and dock hands who carried their exhaustion in harness like a second skeleton. The station master, an ex-pilot with a scar across their nose like a parenthesis, listened to Naira's questions and Jace's calibration requests and said, "If a queen learned trade, she learned it from us. We talk too much. Or from our translators," Jace said, thumb absently brushing the scar where his first implant had betrayed him. "The same way I blurted a vow into a room." Naira's ears flicked. "Then we out-silence a queen," she murmured. "And outsay her, when it's time." A prospector pushed a recorded file across the bar, a layered chirclick that slid imperfectly, eerily, into trade. "Yield your spokes. You waste air." And then the part that didn't sound like any CHYRR Jace had heard, a cadence of humor under the threat. "Funny queens are dangerous," Naira said. "They like their own tricks too much." "Then we'll make the trick boring," Jace said. "Machines hate boredom less than queens do." Before they ran the reach, the Vasari contingent insisted on a rite, not superstition but alignment. They took the Aurora through Vasari fold space into a storm, one bred between dimensions where charged particles wrote calligraphy on hulls. On Vasari, they called it the listening. Jace stood bareheaded in a shielded bay open to the storm through a veil of energy. It sounded like rain taught to sing in chords. Naira stood beside him, armor sealed, helmet off. Her fur stood in a halo where static told jokes. Carrick and Baila formed a quiet triangle with them, hands open, blades sheathed. "Say nothing you aren't prepared to carry," Naira said over the music. "Say what your bones want." Jace thought of the Spoke's song, of whisper nodes, of his old habit of letting machines talk while he bit his tongue. He breathed in ozone and out a truth. "I want to be more than the man who fixes the leaks. I want to build the pipes so well the water sings." The storm answered with a low, satisfied purr that vibrated his sternum. Naira spoke in Vasari, short words like pebbles dropped in a clear stream. Jace didn't need translation. He understood the shape. "I will not leave my runner behind, even if the path becomes fashionable to run alone." Carrick said, "I will learn to laugh before the fight, not only after." Vaila said nothing, which counted as a vow in itself. When they stepped back into ordinary quiet, Jace felt tuned, not immune to fear, but resonant with it in a way that let fear pass through without breaking everything it touched. The Aurora ran smoother too. Machines notice when their people make sense. Hadean Reach wasn't a place so much as a corridor through dust and rock with a set of rules that changed every time someone richer needed them to. Aurora's shadow crossed brittle moons that wore minds like bruises. On Ridgeline Station, a cathedral of scaffolds over a nickel iron core, a forewoman named Martha Docks briefed them while feeding a scarred cat. "Queen?" Martha snorted. "I heard a vendor with a voice filter and ambition. But the CHYRR changed patterns. They leave scaffolds intact. They melt hungers, not hardware." "Hungers?" Naira asked. "Peoples. They hit food, water, rest. Keep you moving until your bones make a different noise. Then they talk." "What do they say?" Jace asked. "Stuff that sounds helpful," Martha said grimly. "Yield your spokes. They mean stop sending relief ships. You waste air. They mean close the doors on your neighbor. The kind of advice that gives you one more week while the next folks die faster." Jace swallowed. "A smart enemy sells you your own worst habit in a prettier package." Naira's tail stilled. "Show us where the voice is loudest," she said. They followed faint resonances through the station's ribs to a communications chapel, the sanctum where old miners still said hello to dead friends out of habit. The air there tasted wrong, copper on the tongue, a hum under words. Jace knelt by the old transponder and smiled. "She's using us," he said. "Queen, vendor, whatever, she's bouncing the voice to reverence. Clever. Can you make it stop praying? Martha asked. I can make it snore, Jace said, and got to work. He grafted a detunering to the chapel's throat, a simple box that would bias the transponder's harmonics towards sleep. While he worked, the voice came again, not through speakers but between ribs. Yield your spokes. You waste air. Jace glanced at Naira. She lifted her chin, watching the air like it might try to bite. I hear you, she said to the chapel. But we do not stop carrying each other. Laughter, chitter layered with a human lilt, skittered along the metal. I learned your words, Vulp. I will learn your breath next. Naira stepped closer to the transponder, ears forward, eyes mercury bright. Then listen properly, Sola. Not alone. Your song swarms. Ours braids. Jace's detuner thunked into place. He flipped a breaker, tuned the counterweight until the chapel's hum sank from simpering menace into a baritone contentment. The laughter cut off with an irritated hiss. Annoying, the voice said, and the room felt like a sulky child deprived of a favorite toy. You steal the game. Change games? Jace said, surprising himself with the sharpness in his voice. We can teach you ones where fewer people starve. Silence like teeth clenched. Then run, little builders. I'll find you on a road with no wind. Promises, promises, Carrick muttered, hand never leaving his blade. Ridgeline's bells, electric and earnest, rolled joy through the scaffolds. Martha Dox's forearms loosened from their permanent fold. I owe you more than a cat, she said. But you can start there. The cat declined regally. On the way back to the shuttle, Jace admitted. I don't like being noticed by something that clever. Naira's tail flicked. Good. You'll step softer where tracks cross. Will she? He asked. She will trip, Naira said, and allowed herself a small, toothy smile. We will tidy. Days later, Aurora took a shortcut because sometimes smart people do stupid things on purpose. Eidolon Rake, a fold space corridor that cut 15 days to 6, had a reputation. Ships that traversed it reported hearing voices in the welds and feeling old regrets in their knees. Jace tuned the pump again, then tuned himself. One song, 3 deep breaths. Naira ran a lap of the ship and slowed enough to match his stride when she returned. They entered the rake. Space did an origami trick and pretended to be smaller. The hull shivered, a cat walking over a balcony rail. Voices came, of course, recordings of the crew's own speech refolded out of order, a CHYRR trick plus a phenomenon the astrophysicists swore was strictly natural. Jace heard his voice say, We can teach you, followed by Naira's laughter from 3 weeks ago. It made the hair on his arms consider emigration. Halfway through, systems lagged, milliseconds then seconds. On the scope, a shadow ship bloomed, CHYRR mass, wrong angles, running right behind their wake like a remora on a shark. She's hitching, Viola said, showing her teeth. Then we shake, Naira said. Aurora couldn't fight in fold space, not with dignity. But it could dance. Jace had once built a waveform in a dockyard that made a stubborn freighter shimmy when a crane jammed, gentle, rhythmic, snake-like. He looked at the pump, then at Naira. If I make us undulate, can you time lateral thrusters on my 4-count? He asked. Naira grinned a fox grin. I have been timing you since I met you. He fed the pump a pattern it had never seen, 4 beats long, like a folk song, stress on the 3rd. The ship writhed. Naira called thruster taps, 2 short, 1 long, 1 kiss of nothing, so the shimmy became a swerve. Behind them, the CHYRR shadow overshot the wake and tumbled into rough water no one sane rode. Lose them? Chief Vale yelled. For now, Jace said, hands vibrating with the leftover of doing something slightly stupid and very satisfying. Naira's tail drummed once against his shin. Good trick, she purred. We should write it down as a procedure. He panted. We will, she said, eyes bright. And name it after T. They met her at Ptolemy's Moor, a gas mining hub with docking arms longer than some poems. She didn't arrive in person, CHYRR queens rarely did, but in a sphere of layered glass that held a brood singer like a jewel. The translator, hers, not theirs, rendered her in a voice with a sly, precise cadence. It sounded like someone who loved riddles more than answers. You braid your breath with the foxborn, the queen observed. I approve of braids. They tangle later. Naira stepped forward in formal armor, spattered yet polished. You've killed enough to speak without poetry. But poetry keeps the air pretty while you suffocate, the queen said, amused. Yield your spokes. You waste air. Your joke grows stale, Naira said. Jace leaned toward the translator. She's modulating the carrier wave to pick up our structural harmonics, he whispered. That's how she sits in the room without carrying her own weight. Can you make the room heavy? Naira murmured back. I can make it dance, he said. He slipped Aurora's shimmy into the Moor's docking arms, small sways, perfectly timed, unnoticeable until the whole structure hummed in a beat the queen did not own. The brood singer's sphere vibrated off-key. The queen's voice lost its slyness, just for a second. Annoying, she hissed that word again. Little builder. Do you love your machines more than your lungs? Same difference, Jace said. They're both air, when you treat them right. Naira's ears angled forward. Leave this corridor, she said to the queen, simple as weather. Or bring your body instead of your glass. Silence in which 36 people realized they were holding their breath. I am patient, the queen said at last. Your braised seams will crack. I will sing through. And we will weld better, Naira said. The brood singer withdrew. The Moor exhaled. Martha Dox, patched in as a witness, spat on a rag and said, I hate clever queens. Jace agreed, out loud and in his bones. The answer to clever is plenty. Union and Vasari organized a convoy that wasn't military first, but family, haulers, med ships, seed barges, school scows, tugs with engines rebuilt so many times they told bedtime stories to themselves. They called it the found thread, a braid not of equals but of needed differences. Through static. The queen tried every old trick with new ornaments, whisper nodes that recited kindly lies, swarmlets that posed as coolant leaks, tiny voices in the vents that begged for doors to open. People opened some. People always do. Every time, the thread reached inward. Every time, someone farther along the braid said, have a hand, take it. Jace wrote a script that made diagnostics sing solo when a panel wanted to pretend it was brave and needed no help. Naira recorded a 3-word mantra for guards at airlocks. Breathe. Ask. Anchor. Ridiculously simple. Weirdly effective. 3 times the queen nipped them hard enough to bruise pride and metal. Once she bit the tail of a school scow and tore away its calm dish. Children learned to tie knots in the dark and did not cry, because someone had taught them a game called braiding stars. Once she almost pulled the pump off Aurora's mounts with a harmonic snake. Jace swore with such inventiveness that Naira took notes, for later flattery. The 4th time, the queen sent a parley, an algorithm disguised as mercy. It offered to open a corridor if the convoy jettisoned the heaviest ships. Naira stood on an external spine in vacuum armor, tail floating like a comet, and pointed at the longest, ugliest tug in the thread. That one first, she said. We turn where it can turn. Jace ran the pump to tug tempo, a low confident thrum like big animals walking. The convoy bowed as one to the tug's patience. The corridor the queen offered closed like a trap when they didn't bite. The thread drifted past, rude as charity. She laughed in their teeth. They kept moving. The thread emerged from the reach into real space above a planet the maps called Oriole. And the locals called home if you're tired. It had atmosphere, water, soil that didn't ask too many questions. The convoy settled like a long exhale. Kids vomited heroically. Bells rang out of tune and no one corrected them. The queen's voice murmured once more, thin, far, bored. You will crack, she promised with the air of someone who can't stand being ignored. Maybe, Jace said quietly, loading crates. But not today. He and Naira stood at the edge of a new-built field with painted lines for a game neither of them knew yet. The wind smelled like pepper and rain beginning elsewhere. Naira's ears read the sky. Her tail brushed his calf. "We kept up," he said, not asking. "We kept with," she corrected gently. "Better word. Less lonely." He grinned. "Words matter. They change how your feet fall," she said, pleased. "And how your hands lift." Jace looked at the thread unspooling into a temporary city, tents and welders and laughter, and the solid ache of people refusing to stop being people. He felt the old hinge in him, once tuned to survival, settle into a new note entirely. "Veth," he said, the breathe before leap. "Sola," she answered, not alone. "Athri," they said together, "hold fast." Then they went to help raise a kitchen, because victories are only real when someone eats, and Jace tuned the stove with a flick and a grin while Naira showed a child how to tie a knot that won't betray you if you pull on it in the dark. Above them, stars found their places. Somewhere very far away, a queen plotted a new joke. And on the plain that wasn't a plain, with wind that had crossed a long road to be here, a human builder and a Vulpine sentinel kept doing the small, stubborn things that turn a path into a home. The first lullaby arrived as a maintenance ping, nothing poetic, just a firmware prompt on a food printer aboard the school scout Piper Finch. 5 minutes later the galley hummed an old nursery cadence, and half the crew nodded off at their stations. No harm, not the first time. The second lullaby nested itself in ballast pumps and sang a different tune, slow, patient, rest now, until pressure alarms woke the sleepers with bruises. The third struck a watch rotation board, shifting names into a rhythm that guaranteed no one overlapped where they should. Accidents followed. None fatal. All persuasive. "Her new trick is gentle sabotage," Jace said, eyes gritty, hands steady. "Not knives. Pillows." Naira's ears pinned. "Pillows drown, if you lay them right." They dissected code and unearthed an elegant rope of commands, a lullaby array, tiny phrases broadcast along utility metadata fields, too low to trip security, too domestic to seem hostile. It tuned devices toward energy-saving modes, dimmed lights by half, softened alarms, delayed fan starts, every small mercy sharpened until it cut. "Permission loops," Jace muttered. "She's learned our kindness and turned it carnivorous." "Then we change the kindness," Naira said. "Make it sharp where it needs to be." Jace wrote a counter-scheme, Cradle and Bell. Cradle protected critical systems from convenience. Bell amplified alerts that humans habitually softened. He built it like a song, verse, baseline states, chorus, shared alarms, bridge, overrides, final refrain, manual confirmation with a single word, Sola, because saying not alone out loud reminded hands to call for help. They rolled Cradle and Bell through the thread with a carnival's worth of cajoling. People don't like broken convenience. People like breathing more. The lullabies faltered, then sharpened in response, like a cat annoyed that the toy no longer squeaked. The array began injecting praise into logs, good job saving power. As if compliments could undo physics. Naira looked at the message, bared her teeth, and said to the air, "Flatter our lungs, Queen. Not our logs." The logs, wisely, said nothing. A Vasari courier cut between ships with a windhouse banner folded under its nosecone. Naira took the call and went very still. "The storm breeding grounds," she said afterward, voice measured. "Someone is taking the heart storms too early. The plains are not seasoning right. Crops will fail if the cycle slips." "HFY?" Jace asked. "Poachers with a clever buyer," Naira said. "Or a queen testing if she can nudge weather the way she nudges code." The thread could spare her for a time, the grounds could not. It wasn't a choice. It was a path that already existed and had her footprints on it. "You should go," Jace said before she asked him to agree. "And you should keep the thread loud," she said before he asked her to trust him with it. They stood in the narrow space between duty and want and did the practical thing, made lists. Which of her guards stayed, Carrick, which went Viola, which signals meant drop everything and sprint, which meant finish your tea first. She unlatched the silver band on his wrist and replaced it with a braided storm string, knotted fibers that hummed faint when rubbed. For luck, she said. For remembering the sound of your ground, he said. They pressed foreheads. The ship seemed to hush around them, as if goodbyes deserve clean acoustics. Sola, she murmured. Athri, he answered. Hold fast. Her tail brushed his wrist once, a last punctuation. Then she was gone, a streak of orange and steel threading a corridor, a courier peeling into stars. The space she left didn't feel empty. It felt like a room he'd keep tidy for when she stepped back in. Jace took the thread center with Chief Vale and a rotating clutch of stubborn captains. They called their ad hoc unit the Patchwork, because that's what it looked like, tugs and tenders zip-tied with willpower. No military crispness. Plenty of competence. He wrote patch notes, single-page diagrams and mantras for civilians. If the alarm seems polite, suspect it. If a door is easy, ask why. If you must choose between elegant and obvious, choose obvious. He boiled complex wave math into hand-field tests. How a bulkhead should thrum under fingers when a pump is truthful, what a lying fan smells like. He taught kids to carry bell tokens, coin-sized pucks that made a clean chime if someone said, Sola, within earshot. He convinced 3 grizzled freighter captains to adopt buddy-breathing drills for ships. If one galley went dark, its neighbor sent stew. No forms, no pride. Stew. The lullaby array tried to cuddle them back to sleep. Cradle and bell twined through the patchwork like tendons. The convoy's noises changed. Less apologetic, more declarative. Engineers started annotating logs with small swear words to keep themselves awake. Jace approved silently. At night, being a concept they cajoled into existence by agreeing on time, he stood alone in an access crawl and touched the storm string on his wrist until it sang in the bones. He didn't call. They'd set rules about that. He simply let the hum stay still here. The thread moved. The array sulked. The Queen watched. On Vasari, Naira arrived to chaos wrapped in ritual. The storm breeding grounds lay like a tilted bowl where heat and pressure kissed until clouds were born mean and useful. Poachers had planted quill spires, thin rods that teased storms to climax early and bottled electricity in humming jars. It looked like a factory had seduced the horizon. Thalen stood ankle-deep in crackling grass with 3 elders and a line of cubs clutching sandbags. Weather thieves, the elder scowled. They steal from the future to flatter the present. Naira led a hunt that was mostly disentangling, the hardest kind. You can't stab a cycle. You can only persuade it. She and Viola mapped where coils had knotted the storm's arteries and cut those knots in an order that wouldn't rip the sky. They sang, too, low Vasari work songs that teach breath to honor pace. The storm understood in its way. It softened. It saved rage for later. Poachers arrived to reclaim their jars, arrogant as men who think they've domesticated a wildness. Naira introduced them to polite failure, wrists bound with storm string that stung when lied to, faces turned toward wind until they remembered they were smaller than weather. Who pays you? She asked the bold one. Everyone who hates a waiting season, he said, chin up. Markets don't like patience. Neither do children, Thalen said mildly. We do not let them decide dinner. The elders confiscated the jars and poured them back into sky, dangerous, tensile grace. Naira watched strike lines dance and felt the old training tighten her spine into readiness and joy. Later, lying on a roof listening to gutters tell rain gossip, she rubbed the string at her wrist and felt the answering hum like a second heartbeat in the distance. Still here, she whispered to the storm and the man both. The storm grumbled good. The Queen's next move was unkind and clever. She seeded breaker nodes into the thread's fold anchors, the massy fixtures ships used to get a grip on space-time before slipping through. Breakers didn't damage hardware. They desynchronized trust. Every third handshake failed, every fifth calibration drifted a decimal, every second confirmation arrived a beat late. People started checking twice, then 3 times, then not at all because checking was water in the lungs. Jace caught it because he heard a new hitch in the pump's breath, tiny gaps where certainty blinked. He ripped a breaker out of a junction with more force than necessary and hissed through his teeth. "She's making us doubt our metronomes." Vale scratched his chin. "Can you give us a drum louder than doubt?" "I can give you a clap," Jace said, eyes lighting. "Crude. Honest. Loud." He built handclasp, a synchronization protocol that ignored elegant timing for a single, shared bang. A pulse every ship generated and listened for, long enough to be unmistakable, bright enough to leave no room for sly delays. It wasted power. It was impossible to fake without getting caught. It felt like a room full of people agreeing to stomp the floor in unison just to spite silence. Handclasp rolled, the thread stomped. Breakers chattered, then sulked, then fell silent because nothing is more boring than a trick that never lands. On Vasari, Naira watched lightning play checkers with the ridge and grinned without knowing why. "You hear it?" Thalen asked. "The convoy learned a new song," she said. "The good ones are stupid and loud," the elder agreed. They set their rendezvous at Crossroads, a teapot of a station where 4 minor routes met to exchange gossip and fruit. Jace's shuttle kissed the lock and his boots hit a floor that smelled faintly of oranges. He didn't realize how starved he'd been for oranges until the smell made his eyes threaten mutiny. Naira was there, of course. Because when you earn a habit, you keep it. She wore field plates dusted with dried rain, hair braided with storm string, ears forward like sails wanting wind. Jace stopped walking because something inside him, or perhaps everything, had to mark this sight with proper ceremony. "Eat first," she said, "because priorities." She handed him a paper boat of dumplings steamed in a leaf, spicy as good decisions. He burned his mouth and pretended not to. She pretended not to notice. They sat on a crate and watched people braid around them. Vasari cubs sharing skewers with human kids, a CHYR scribe, docile, monitored, trading etched plates for repair work, a belter arguing cheerfully with a Vasari over whose grandmother made better jam. "How's your storm?" he asked. "Untied and sulking appropriately," she said. "Yours?" "Loud and on purpose," he said. "We built a clap." "I heard," she said, eyes bright. "Stupid. Loud. Good." They took a room with a window that didn't bother with tint. They didn't talk strategy first. They took off boots. They counted scars, new and old, like archivists. They slept 8 hours in a row because sometimes the bravest thing is to let your body be heavy without apology. In the morning, they compared notes. The Queen's jokes. The market's impatience. The Elder's wisdom and its limits. They planned not an assault but an annoyance campaign. Deny the Queen prestige. Make her best tricks feel like chores. "Nothing dies quicker than a glamorous failure," Naira said. "Then we make failing at us very glamorous." Jace agreed, wicked and tired and in love with the audacity of living. The chance came quiet. A message relayed through a CHYR scribe who had decided curiosity was a form of treason. The Queen would test the cathedral node alone, no swarm, just a single body, arrogant and hungry for clean data. Advantage ledge, a maintenance platform overlooking a fold plume. "Alone?" Carrick said, disbelieving. "Alone," the scribe clicked. "She trusts songs, not soldiers." They built a room that wouldn't flatter her, no echoes, no admiring audience, just a platform tuned with handclasp stupid loud heartbeat and cradle and bell's sharp kindness. Naira waited in formal armor that carried rain scent. Jace tuned the node's frame to a key the Queen did not own. When the Queen arrived, she came in a body shaped for utility rather than display, long-limbed, plated, eyes like quarry quartz. She stepped onto the platform with the confidence of a monarch who believes rooms change shape to please her. "Yield your spokes," she began, out of habit more than strategy. "You waste." The platform clapped. Once. Then again. The sound made no sonic sense, it made social sense. The Queen's voice stuttered. She tasted a room that would not let her be chorus and conductor both. Naira spoke first. We brought you boredom, she said. Try it. You might live longer. The Queen's eyes narrowed. You refuse beauty, Fox. We refuse flattery that kills, Naira said. Your lullabies are lies and silk. You build a world of clang and stew, the Queen sneered. Yes, Jace said, stepping forward. Because stew keeps children alive, and clang tells workers they are not alone. Annoying, the Queen breathed, the word now a benediction of failure. You make conquest feel like chores. That's the point, Naira said. If you cannot turn murder glamorous, your recruits get bored and go home. The Queen looked past them, at the fold plume, at the thread drifting like a village. Something old in her posture sagged, pride or hunger or the belief that she was owed applause. You will crack, she said, but there was no conviction in it. We'll fix it, Jace said gently. And feed each other while we do. She stepped back from the node. Not defeated. Redefined. Queens hate being nouns when they prefer verbs. She left without flourish. The platform clapped once more, quietly. It sounded like hands shaking after an argument that didn't end friendship but didn't begin it either. After Vantage Ledge, the lullaby array kept trying, the breakers kept poking, the whispers kept testing doors. But glamour had gone out of the Queen's voice. Her followers found more interesting cults, a racing league, a monastic order that fermented improbable vegetables, a cargo choir. People tire of doom when doom loses its theatrics. The thread laid temporary roots on aureole and began sketching permanent ones. Jace authored manuals he never would have believed in a few years prior, the stupid loud book of not dying in fold space. He wrote in plain words and bad jokes because bad jokes stick when alarms wail. He taught apprentices how to listen to pumps and to themselves, to treat both with a mix of tenderness and suspicion. Naira returned to the storm breeding grounds each season and returned to Jace each time with her hair smelling of rain. They ran the spine on Vasari and the ring on Ceres, comparing blisters like maps. In the windhouse, Thalen's staff added a new copper ring whose bell note sat exactly between laughter and warning. One evening in Kesola, the house they named Not Alone, they boiled stew while the pump in the wall hummed a smug little hum. Jace tuned it an eighth down. It accepted his correction with dignity. Naira said bowls, tail flicking a waltz. Do you miss the chase? He asked, not quite a fear, not quite a tease. I wake to it, she said, tapping his chest, then her own, then the wall, then the night outside. It is all chase. We just changed what we run toward. He handed her a spoon. To glamorous chores, he said. To glamorous chores, she echoed, ears tipping in amusement. They ate. They argued gently about the right number of cloves in a stew meant for friends. They fell asleep to wine, teaching the door chime a new rhythm. Far away, a queen retuned her songs to make fewer children sleep and more engineers swear in relief. Closer, a convoy revised its maps to include kitchens. Closest, a human and a Vulpine sentinel kept their pace, Veth before leaps, Sola through nights, Athri whenever the world pretended to tip. Some bonds, once forged, stop being stories. They become infrastructure, the pipes under a city that make showers possible, the beams no one notices until they sing wrong, the steady drum you clap to because it's stupid and loud and good. And when the translator in Jace's jaw warmed, threatening to broadcast a thought he hadn't yet shaped, he spoke it deliberately, in both alphabets, with both hands busy and his mouth smiling. You are extraordinary. Only one person needed to hear it. She did. She always would. Peace never dies loudly. It yawns. The found thread became a corridor rather than a caravan. Oriole blossomed into a hub, Vasari storm cycles fell back into rhythm, Union freight captains stopped checking their alarms twice. Even Jace noticed himself shrugging at irregularities he once would have sworn were knives. Peace is boring, Chief Vale grumbled one evening, oiling a pump valve. Good, Jace said, wiping his hands. Boring means I get to invent bad metaphors for students inst. Elle twitched once in amusement. He tells truths sideways. Useful for children. Less useful for pipes. But boredom grows teeth when people stop respecting it. Merchants lobbied to cut patrol budgets. Families grew restless in the long, safe corridors. Some even muttered the Queen had been a myth, a convenient fiction to weld alliances. Naira sat on their porch one evening, combing dew out of her tail. "They forget too quickly," she said. "Because forgetting feels safe," Jace answered. She glanced at him, silver eyes sharp. "Then we remind. Not with knives, with bells." They built an archive, not of victories, but of mistakes. Jace designed it like a workshop, interactive panels, broken components, logs of systems that failed in creative ways. Naira contributed artifacts, scarred blades, cracked storm jars, even the storm string that had once bound poachers' wrists. Each piece came with a story told bluntly, no polish. Here is the time we nearly starved because someone wanted convenience. Here is the plate etched with a queen's almost song. Here is the hinge that sang wrong until a boy listened. Children ran through it, not in reverence but in curiosity. Elders nodded approval. Engineers sighed relief. Finally, a museum where things smelled like sweat and metal. At the entrance hung 3 words in both alphabets. Veth. Leap. Sola. Not alone. A3. Hold fast. "This will keep boredom honest," Naira said, ears flicking forward with satisfaction. Jace scratched his jaw. "And give me an excuse to yell at tourists when they touch my pump demo. Everyone needs hobbies," she said gravely. It started with dreams. Miners on a belt near Lysander Gate reported hearing lullabies while asleep, voices that coaxed them to sleep longer, skip shifts, forget meals. They woke with bruises from fainting. "The Queen?" Carrick asked grimly. "Or someone borrowing her mask?" Naira said. They traced it to an old scribe who had turned her plates into a choir engine, a device that layered voices until they blurred. She claimed it was mercy. "Better to dream than to bleed." "Mercy that starves," Naira said flatly. Jace touched the device, felt its hum. "It's clever. Not hers, but inspired. It doesn't kill fast enough to scare, doesn't comfort long enough to save." They dismantled it carefully, salvaging plates for study. Naira turned to the scribe. "You sang with her voice." "Why?" The scribe clacked mandibles. "Because boredom kills alliances faster than claws." Later, in their quarters, Jace muttered, "Maybe he's not wrong. People get itchy when safe." Naira wrapped her tail around his wrist. "Then we give them challenges worth itching for." So they invented games. Jace and Naira proposed annual convoy trials, not war games, but maintenance and endurance tournaments. Teams raced to repair failing junctions, decode sabotage simulations, sprint relay along hulls and mock breach runs. Vasari kids sparred humans in padded staff bouts while elders kept score with ruthless fairness. Winners earned bells, bronze, silver, gold, that rang different tones when struck. Losing was still honorable, surviving was the point. The first games were chaotic. Alarms blared at the wrong time. Half the kids refused to wear gloves. One freighter captain disqualified himself by swearing too loudly at a stubborn bolt. Everyone loved it. "It feels like play," Naira said, ears lifted, as bells clanged across the plaza. "Play with purpose," Jace said. "Best kind." The games became tradition, something to scratch boredom's itch with joy instead of paranoia. Even the archive gained a new wing. Funny failures. Jace insisted on including his first attempt at balancing a Vasari staff, where he face-planted into sand. Naira told that story far too often. Peace doesn't erase distance. Naira still took seasons at the storm breeding grounds. Jace sometimes spent months with the patchwork flotilla, teaching new crews. Letters, half jokes, half confessions, bridged the gap. Her letter, "The storm jar cracked today. We laughed while it poured itself back into sky. I miss your sideways truths." His reply, "The pump sulked until I sang to it. Vale says I've gone soft. I miss your tail knocking tools off shelves." Reunions were quiet, never theatrical. She'd step into Casola, tail brushing the doorframe, and he'd already have water boiling. They never greeted with words first. Always forehead to forehead, silent until the breath steadied. Then came stew, laughter, chores. Is it strange, Jace asked one night, that the part one miss most is folding laundry with you? Not strange, Naira said. Chase is exciting. Folding is trust. Whispers said the queen still lived, wandering corridors, teaching small minds old tricks. But she no longer ruled swarms. She was a story with sharp teeth, nothing more. One day a Vasari cub asked Naira, "Did you kill her?" "No," Naira said honestly. "We annoyed her until she left." "Why not kill?" "Because then she becomes a martyr. Better she is a bore." The cub's ears flicked. "I like boring." "Good," Naira said, smiling. "Boring keeps you alive to like exciting things later." That answer spread faster than any rumor. Soon taverns joked about boring queens and glamorous chores. Even the word annoying became a badge of pride. To survive, you had to be the sort of people who irritated predators simply by continuing to live loudly and care for each other. 5 years into peace, the convoy trials merged with Vasari festivals into a single event, the Festival of Bells. Ships arrived strung with ribbons. Markets filled with food both spiced and bland. Children ran contests with bells strapped to tails or belts, ringing chaos through the streets. At dusk, the great windhouse tolled every bell together, discordant, ridiculous, joyful. The sound shook roofs and rattled cups and left no room for whispers. Jace and Naira stood at the edge of the crowd, hands linked. "This is stupid loud," he said, grinning. "Good," she answered, tail curling around his calf. "Stupid loud keeps boredom honest." They kissed, forehead first, then mouths, while bells sang like a city of storms too proud to be quiet. Years passed. The archive filled with new mistakes, the games with new laughter, the festival with new bells. Children grew up fluent in both alphabets. Old ships retired and were repurposed into homes. Jace grew silver in his beard. Naira grew silver in her fur. They ran the spine less quickly, but still together. They folded laundry with reverence, ate stew with gratitude, tuned pumps with patience. One night, in Kethsola, Jace pressed his translator and spoke deliberately, clearly. "Extraordinary." Naira tilted her ears. "I already knew." "Just making sure." Her tail brushed his wrist. "Say it again tomorrow." "I will." And he did. Because some bonds never end. They become the pace beneath every step, the hum beneath every engine, the bell that keeps boredom honest and life extraordinary. Veth. Leap. Sola. Not alone. A3. Hold fast. Forever.